Hello, welcome. This is my first ever webinar. I've done a few podcasts in my time, but this is the first webinar, so yeah, bear with me. And of course, we chose podcasting as our sort of first topic. So this one, as you know, is titled the Recruitment Podcast, hosting Roundtable. So within this webinar, we hope to share some insights, experience, a bit of advice on podcasting for experience, but also anyone that really wants to start off their podcasting journey. So a little bit about myself. If you don't know who I am, my name is Hayden Morgans, and I'm the director of SearchStack. We're a recruitment marketing agency. We specialize in content, websites, and strategy. And podcasting actually plays a huge part in sort of like the content ecosystem that we offer and our service offering. So it's something we're super passionate about. And I personally host my own podcast as well called Skill Point, which is on a mission to level up the recruitment marketing industry by speaking to experts on topics and doing cool stuff like this here. So, hopefully we can do more of this and get some more experts on different topics. So in this webinar, we're going to be unpacking what it means to be a podcast host, look at the why of podcasting, the stories, the experiences of our guests, and building those hosting skills and what that looks like. And things like finding guests, good guests, and the prep that goes in before it. We're going to talk to people like Robert on getting sponsorships and the technical aspects, that everyone always asks, what gear we need to get, etc. like that. So hopefully we can spend like the next hour talking to our three main guests here about, how they do things and what it means to host a really successful podcast, because these three are certified podcasting legends. So let's talk about the agenda quickly over this hour. So we're going to do the first sort of section. Hi, Kieran. Good to see you. Thanks for chopping in. So we're just talking about the agenda. It's going to be an introduction from our three guests and some like strategy insight from them. It's going to be 10, 15 minutes. And then we've got the main meat of it, about 35 minutes. And we'd be asking some bigger questions like standing out in a crowded market, getting started, technical aspects, prepping, finding good guests, promoting your podcast, sponsorship, running events, all things like that. And then the third section of the webinar will be a Q&A. So it'll be time for you guys to ask some questions that you've got burning, and that'll take 10, 15 minutes and we'll wrap up like that. And then after the webinar, we'll send over a Vimeo link once we've edited it up. And we're also going to start compartmentalizing all the insights as well. So hopefully we can put it into like a download for you, a little ebook for you to reference back to and get some insights on taking podcast further. Cool. Right, so let's introduce our guests. So firstly, we have Robert Hanna. He is host of the Legally Speaking podcast. Now, he's into season 7 and has hosted over 200 plus episodes, crazy, and signed on a unicorn sponsor. And he's just found out his #1 law podcast was pretty awesome. So, Robert, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Hayden, and good to see you all. And Hish, good to see you, mate, as well. I'm very well excited to be here. Do you want me to sort of just give 20 seconds on my background, or shut up and give it back to you?
We'll intro everyone first, and then we need to intro you proper. And then secondly, we've got Hishem, host of the Recruitment Mentors podcast. Everyone in this chat probably knows who this man is. He's the OG of the recruitment podcast space and has years worth of amazing interviews, live events, and more under his belt. Hishem, how you doing? I don't know. I tried to look.
Sorry, I'm late again.
I tried to look how many podcasts you've done, but do you know what number you're at the moment?
492 this week. So getting close to 500 eps.
Oh, damn. How you doing, Hishem? You doing all right, mate?
Yeah, good. Thank you. I'd like to be here.
Yeah, cool. And then thirdly, we've got Ben Browning, host of the Recruitment Better podcast. Ben's going into his 3rd season now, and you've landed some really impressive guests, and we're already hitting some big numbers already. So how you doing, Ben?
Really well, thanks. Yeah, really good to be here, Hayden. And absolutely not in the same league as Hishem and Robert in terms of the episodes, but really pleased to share my journey and how it's been starting out. Really, that first piece of the journey.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, it's probably been so long for you and Hishem and Robert. It's feels like a lifetime ago, I'd imagine, setting up yours. Okay, so let's do some introductions. So let's start with you, Robert. The question I'm going to ask all three of you is, could you introduce yourselves, your podcasting journey, and the most important question is, why did you start your podcast, and what was the strategy behind it when you first kicked it off? Robert?
Yeah, thank you. I'll start with the why. Firstly, quick recruitment background. I've been in recruitment since 2008. I started in the FTSE 250 in the City of London for the S3 group, moved from there. Then I moved to a boutique firm, helped scale that to seven figures, and thought this is very interesting. I could probably do it for myself. And I have my family background's in law, and I always wanted to do something connected to the legal industry. But this comes back to my why. No one cares about my why and why I set up the recruitment company. No one was going to come to my door just if I'd made an announcement that, hey, I've got a recruitment company, because there's millions of competitors out there already with heavy databases, established client portfolios, and everything else. But what I noticed at the time when I launched my legal recruitment firm was no one was really focusing on thought leadership or content or digital. And podcasting was quite new in 2019. And Hish was very carefully strategic in his move, but actually, I got in early. So I was the first legal recruitment firm in the UK to launch a podcast, and that really helped identify thought leadership. And it kind of enabled me to go and start discussions with law firms, because on top of just the traditional specking in a CV and hoping to get a connection, or, meeting someone at a networking event, going from there, I could actually start leading my conversations, going to law firms saying, hey, I can see your practice areas in X, Y, and Z. I've actually got this show which is focused all around legal careers. I can put your voice in, 1,500 cities around the world. We can produce some really interesting content and discussions that's going to help you not only be seen more as a thought leader, but attractive to the talent that you're trying to consume, because they're active in these digital spaces that your firm's not currently operating in. Would you love to have a chat? So a really great way to start the relationship of actually building and penetrating the legal market. And that was one of the reasons why I started my show, because I wanted to be seen as a thought leader in legal and collaborate with people from there. And as a result of that, as years and years have gone by, we've obviously attracted a unicorn sponsor who are actually now a Centaur, which means they're 100 million annual recurring revenue. We've got a 6-figure deal through podcasts. We charge people to come on. We get a huge interest from the show. And that all started from taking action. I think someone mentioned before, I've been sitting on the idea. If there's one thing I can tell you today, if it's an idea, just scrap that and put it into action, because I genuinely think starting a podcast with the right strategy is the best thing you can do. I'm conscious of the time, so I'll pause there and pass over to the other guys, but that's just quick history.
Thanks. Thank you, Robert. Shall we move on to you, Ben?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So as you say, I'm Ben Browning. I run the Recruiting Better podcast, which is designed to share insights and inspirations with ambitious recruiters and recruitment leaders. And I think, in terms of the why for the podcast, I kind of had a slightly different scenario perhaps to Robert, although maybe some parallels. I've been creating content on LinkedIn for quite a long time, getting quite a lot of conversations with recruiters who aren't my target market for the kind of the space that I sell into. Typically work with recruitment business owners, but having lots of questions come to me from recruiters about how to build sales playbooks, how to get more effective at their business development or even their delivery aspects of their role. And so it felt like the next natural step was to share more of my content in a different kind of format. I almost kind of felt like I'd saturated or reached a ceiling with the amount of kind of content I could share on LinkedIn. I'm sure some of you might well agree with that. But yeah, having that additional channel to share content through, and also like it was just really interesting to me as well. I really enjoy listening to podcasts. We might talk later about kind of the model that I've adopted and where I've adopted that from. But I enjoy podcasting. I enjoy both doing solo shows where I get to share ideas and talk about stuff that perhaps recruiters haven't heard before on the show, but also interviewing, as you mentioned in the blurb about my show earlier, the kind of the guests that I've been able to bring on have been fantastic, and in particular guests who perhaps are new to the recruitment audience as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Cheers, Ben. And then finally you, Hishem.
So what would you like to know from me? Sorry.
So yeah, at any point you want me to repeat the question, just give me a shout. So yeah, intro about yourself and your podcasting journey, and then what did you start your podcast, and what was the strategy starting off, and maybe how it's evolved now over the years.
Right, cool. I'll keep it short because keen to get into the meat of this for everyone. Started the podcast just over 5 years ago. I've just ended up creating something that I wish I had when I was in recruitment. So I started when I was in recruitment. Worked in recruitment for just under 3 years. Was just very open-minded to, anything that I could assume that could help me get better in recruitment. So back then, 5 and a bit years ago, like there wasn't as much content at all on how to be a better recruiter than there is now. So yeah, I mean, if I'm honest, I had the idea whilst driving into my recruitment job. I got sick of listening to the Joe Rogan podcast one day, and I thought, why don't I look for a recruitment podcast? Didn't exist. Why don't I create one? I'm in a business of 8 people. The only people I can learn from are the people directly sitting next to me. If I interview recruiters on how they got to the top, you know, what they learned along the way, challenges, and I can get better from that, whilst hopefully helping one other person in the industry get better or inspire someone to get into the recruitment industry. That sounds like a good trade. And then one thing has just led to the other, but I took action, started it on my mobile phone when I got home from my recruitment job. And yeah, like it's just grown from there really. But I had an itch, I itched it for myself. And yeah, it's been one of the best decisions I've made.
Perfect. Great. Thank you. And Hishem, I'm going to ask you a follow-up question. Now that you're kind of years in and, you know, almost 500 episodes, it's crazy. What do you think makes a good podcast, and how can you stand out into a market that's getting a little bit more crowded these days?
Cool. So the number one thing that I want all of you to remember from this is the following: 90% of podcasts don't get past episode 3, and of the remaining 10% don't make it past episode 20. So by publishing 21 episodes, you automatically get into the top 1%. That's like the fundamental thing to hear here. So you can Google that. But that's like a stat I've heard other people say. And that's just really important to remember. I think the most important thing to take away is just like what you were saying and what Rob was saying, which is action. I don't think you need to worry about how many people are listening, all these types of things, until you get past at least episode 20, because automatically then you've done a better job of, you know, keeping the habit of publishing a podcast episode and doing a podcast, and you're instantly in, you know, the top 1% of people that actually have a podcast, rather than this being an idea that you do for a couple of weeks and then you don't pick up again. So I think for me, what makes a good podcast is getting past that stage and doing it consistently, because that's when you really start to reap the benefits and rewards of having a podcast. But I definitely don't buy into the idea of like, everyone has a podcast now, it's not worth doing. I think there's always an audience for someone, regardless of how big it is. I think, you know, if your niche is software developers that use a certain technology, if you have a podcast that just speaks to those people, that should be deemed as valuable and useful, despite it maybe not being as a big audience as like a general audience would be. So I think that's what I'd probably want to start with, is like just taking action and getting to that milestone. Is the number one thing that we want to aim to do. I've got some ideas on how you can maximize those initial episodes and time, and how to do that with, you know, having a recruitment business in mind and being a recruiter, which I'll share. But that's the first thing that I'd probably say.
Yeah, perfect. Right, I'm going to write a note for your maximizing tips, and we'll talk about that later. Robert, I think we're kind of alluding around what you mentioned earlier, and I think is kind of what we discussed on that podcast, is that cost of inaction. Do you want to talk about that a little bit more, just because I think that will fit perfectly?
Yeah, firstly, +1 to what Hishem said. Yeah, just write down TOI and COI. COI is cost of inaction. If I hadn't taken action with my podcast, I don't think we'd have the level of inbound leads that we've got today. I don't think I'd have got the opportunities to work with LinkedIn, Thomson Reuters, to get a sponsor, to collaborate with all these amazing people. I think podcasting can really elevate you from being seen as just a recruiter to a genuine thought leader and expert in your space. But to come back to the point, and his statistics are absolutely right, because I know lots of people that have started podcasts and they haven't had a way of maintaining consistency is important. But I think what Hishem's example is a great example of what I call topic of influence. He had a problem. You know, he couldn't find anything around him that was suitable. So he started a podcast that was linked to that. So for you sat there, I was thinking, what are the common questions I get from my candidates and clients all the time? So for me in the legal industry is how to qualify as a lawyer, how to become a corporate lawyer, how to transition from law into legal technology, how to make the legal industry more diverse and inclusive for clients. So I was thinking my topic of influence, which is the pain point I'm trying to service the audience I'm talking to, was all around legal careers. And I didn't call mine strategically the KC Partners, which is my holding company name. I wanted to call it something relatable, because not everyone is really interested in talking to a recruiter. They don't really want to all the time, but they'll talk to a thought leader and someone putting out content. And so it was like my front end, the Gary V jab, put out the Legally Speaking podcast, put it legal careers content, and I hook them on the back end with the fact that we also do all this excellent recruitment work. So I think really understand what that topic of influence is, the pain point that you're continuously coming up against in your industry challenges, and make sure you're relentlessly passionate about it. Like bizarrely, I geek out about changes in the law, things that are happening in legal technology. I'm passionate about it. I want to come up and talk about it and interview people about it. But I think the strategic side of really thinking about what is that topic of influence related to your markets and niche, and it should be no more than 1 or 2 words. And you can go on things like answerthepublic.com, keywordsplanner.com, Google Trends, and find out where that data is sort of really hitting hard and where people are searching for that particular pain point right now. But if you get that right, I think you'll be off to the races with a really good strategic way of continuous episodes and servicing your topic of influence. Yeah, I'll shut up.
Yeah, fantastic. No, great insight. Thank you, Robert. And then Ben, what would you recommend to someone, because you're a little bit new in the game as it is, to getting started with their podcast? What have you
absolutely.
learned?
Well, look, I think the guys are absolutely right. It's a case of taking the first step. And I think that the big thing for me actually was, I mentioned this or alluded to this earlier, was finding a format, finding a way to create the kind of show that I really wanted to create. As I built the show out, the first 10 or 12 episodes were all solo shows. But me talking endlessly to the camera, actually to the microphone at the time, because we weren't using video, it was just straight into the microphone, using really easy tools, using the Spotify podcast app, which was previously called something else. Anchor. It was Anchor. Yeah, thank you. Yeah. So recording episodes straight in. But what was the format that was going to make that kind of work? And people still say that their favorite episodes, despite the kind of the slicker production and the guests that I've had on, there are several people who come to me and say, actually, my favorite format or their favorite format was me answering questions from real recruiters. So me getting emails or LinkedIn messages from people saying, hey, what do you think about this particular topic? And responding to that. And of course, I think anybody who recognizes me will know that I've got an opinion on everything, but I tried to kind of cherry pick the questions that I felt A, hadn't potentially been answered before, or B, I could bring a new kind of flavor or kind of take on. And that then gave me just the confidence and the starting point to then be able to go, right, okay, let's go to the next level then. Let's think about who can I bring in to ask more questions here, to bring in different lines of thinking. And we've had people from the recruitment industry, people like Alex Elliott, who I know you guys have spoken to in the past. Hishem did an excellent episode with Alex as well. People from sort of lower profile within the recruitment industry doing really interesting things. And then some absolutely incredible speakers and authors from around the industry, including people like Will Allred from Lavender, who runs a co-founder of a tech company, and Todd Capone, the author of The Transparency Sale, which is probably my favorite episode of all time, because Todd was genuinely like a really truly world-class guest, somebody I wouldn't have had the opportunity to talk to without that platform of podcasting. So the getting started message is, I think for a lot of people, finding the format that fits rather than thinking you have to host people and have to do interviews on every single show.
Yeah, nice. Thank you. Robert, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, sorry, I forget things that come into my brain. I know we're probably going to talk about this, but I just think when we're starting, I want to share it. 2 quick tips. Number 1, if you want to be a successful podcast host, go on other people's podcasts. So what did I do before launching? I actually I went on Hishem's podcast. I learned from him as a podcast host. I liked his style. I liked his way you approach podcasting, but there was a strategy behind that as well. If you go on to a highly well-regarded podcast or podcast that has an audience that's taking guests, and it's relevant to your audience, because remember, for me, I wanted legal careers, but I still wanted to kind of keep known for recruitment. I could basically put a simple call to action on Hishem's show and bounce his audience into mine. But so then the week after I'm launching my show, they're seeing me as a visible person that's in the podcasting space. I've got authority because I've been on a really good show. It just helps. And I'm continuously going on legal and recruitment and careers focused podcasts, because it's the best way to hijack audience, build authority, and to grow my own show. And the other point on just getting started, I was very strategic with my first guest. I actually do a lot of collaborations. Collaboration is domination. I'm a big believer in that. But what I did is I reached out to the London Young Professionals Group, right? And that is a society of legal professionals that are within the exact target market that I'm wanting to create. It's a society of 7,500 people. Why do I say that? I invited the presidents because it's great that they wanted to come on, but what the hell are they going to do? They're going to mail shop that episode out to 7,500 people on their newsletter, and bang, my first episode is already going to get exponential visibility and notice. And suddenly you start getting traction. So think about who are some of the societies, the people with big communities that are actually going to help you grow your show, who maybe have mailing lists, who have big TikTok followings, whatever it is. Those are the sort of people, ideally, if you can try and get them onto your show to start with, are going to help push it out there. And by the way, do not invite a guest on and then not share it. You're basically wasting your time, in my opinion, unless it's a celebrity or someone absolutely they love, because you want to hijack the audience. So you've got to make your assets, your quality of what you produce good enough that they're going to want to share it, and you need to educate them in terms of how they can share it, why it's great to share it, and make it as seamless as possible. Because the amount of people I've seen who have a podcast who don't get their people to share it, or they just do a random share on LinkedIn and it dies, it's almost a waste of your time. So I'm a big advocate of making sure your guests do some legwork for you, but not making it feel like it's legwork.
And Robert, you have a really good ability to keep your guests engaged, even after they've been on their podcast. Do you want to share a little bit about that and the kind of things that you do to keep them sort of in your sphere of influence?
Yeah, I'm a big believer in not a one and done. So today I've been drafting a newsletter. You can go onto my LinkedIn page, go into my featured section. You can see my Legally Speaking news and views newsletter. I'm continuously have trackers on all of our guests that we have. So if they've won an award, if they've been used for something, if they've been doing something or something's happened in the industry, we repurpose that episode and spotlight that particular person and shine a light on them. So one of the guests last week had just been acknowledged for Diversity Inclusion Thought Leader of the Year 2023. Great, we can repurpose that episode, we can shout them out, and it's a great way then to super boost our downloads. They're happy because they're getting some more visibility and praise, and it's a great way to keep people engaged in the community. The other thing we have is a Discord community. Some people hate Discord, some people like it. I, for one, believe in it because I didn't just set up another sort of Web 2 platform. I wanted to use something where we could share sort of interactive content, GIFs, videos, audiograms, all of these things, and it just worked for me. And so we have that community with we have a dedicated community manager. We're sharing insights, we're sharing resources. So we're not just being a show just about podcasting, we're turning it into a whole community of a learning hub as well, with the anchor being the content of the shows.
Yeah, I love it. And I'm going to drop in a bit of advice here as well. So when you start to leverage community, I think this is kind of like the holy grail of what happens with a podcast, where you go hosting events like Hishem does, and we'll touch on that later. You start to create this like self-fulfilling sort of ecosystem. So you have people in your community talking about issues, and then you can take those issues and look at the content that's been discussed and then plug it back into your podcast to create more relevant content that brings more people into your community, and it just keeps building like that. I'm going to ask you, Hishem, a quick question, because I remember from our podcast, you just gave this amazing nugget of wisdom on how you find the guests. You know, you constantly come up with amazing guests and amazing conversations. So what is your process behind this and finding good guests and landing them?
Well, I'll talk from the standpoint of if I was starting out again, because obviously, because I've done it for a long time, most of the time I either get recommendations or people reach out to me, or I ask for recommendations. So I think you guys can all ask me a question or share with me what you think when we all do a bit of Q&A. But I think one of the number one reasons that I found when recruitment companies aren't consistent with a podcast, or recruiters a bit concerned about starting a podcast, is how much time it will take. Recruiters typically, I found, particularly when we're speaking to recruiters about training, what they need help with, oftentimes we'll say they're not very good at time management, prioritization. So to add on running a podcast on top of that, it's like, how the fuck am I going to do that with everything else that I've got to do? So I'll just talk from the perspective of to start again as a recruiter, or if I had a recruitment business. I think the number one thing that we want to do is just give ourselves a plan on who we're going to get on the podcast, where the time that we're spending on it could also be deemed and viewed as business development time or time spent with existing clients. So it's not just seen as this extra curriculum activity that I have to do. It's, oh, I'm calling someone about coming on my podcast and these are a dream client of ours. It's BD. So what I shared on Hayden's episode, which I'm pretty sure I took from somewhere else, which I really liked, which was having like the perfect first 30 guests. So the first 10 guests for your podcast should be existing clients. Couple of reasons. One, people that are spending a good amount of money with you, spending more time with them, building a relationship, learning more about them, etc. I'd like to think is a good use of time. Secondly, you're doing interviews with people that you should have some sort of relationship with, so you can practice your interviewing skills. It is harder than you think. It's harder to ask questions and shut up and not say like just filling words. Like it is actually quite harder than it looks. I've had to, if I were to listen back to my older podcast episodes, it'd be quite painful, but it's part of the journey. So first 10 existing clients, time well spent, and also you can refine your interviewing skills with people that you should have rapport with. The second 10 should then be target clients, and you are literally reaching out to people saying, hey, Rob, look, we haven't spoken before. You may or may not know, but we're really passionate about, inspiring careers in this industry, which is why we decided to launch this podcast. We always hear great things about your brand. Would you be against having time to speak to me about being involved in our podcast, whatever the outreach message is? And then, you will get a lot more yeses than you anticipate. And those yeses turn into time spent with you, which is time spent with target clients, which is, a unique opportunity to get to know these people, find out about what they're about, et cetera, et cetera. And you will educate them at the very least of like, what it is that you do. So that should be time well spent. It's business development and a different way of reaching out to people. And then the third 10, a bit of what Rob was talking about, should then be, I hate the term, but like influencers or people that have a big brand in your space. Because like Rob was saying, when I've often had spikes on my episodes on when I've got a lot of listens, it's either been the episode has been really fucking good, or it's someone that already had a brand. So I will listen to your podcast, Rob, not because it's Rob hosting it, because Kieran's on there and he's like a big person in my space that I respect. So I'm going to listen to Rob's podcast because Kieran's on there. So I think being really strategic with who you try to get on in your podcast. So then you view the time that you're spending on it as a good use of time rather than it being an extra thing to be doing. And I think that should be anchored to existing clients, target clients, and maybe building relationships with people in your space that have a big reputation that isn't a bad idea to be connected with. So that's sort of my thoughts on it, really.
Amazing. Thank you, Hishem. And let's switch over to you, Ben, because you do a few solo episodes as well. So that's a completely different format. And I know many recruiters will probably go for the guest format because it's great for business development and that audience tracking. But there may be some times where you want to touch on some topics on that solo basis. So how do you go about creating a solo episode? And just give us a bit of a background dive into that.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, look, I might bounce the question back to you as well, right? Because I love your bonus level episodes on the skill point as well, right? So maybe you can share a bit of your thinking on that too. But for me, as I say, it's a case of responding to the questions that I'm getting from my audience. So when people are reaching out, and as a recruiter, you've got so many opportunities to share those common challenges. What do I do in this situation? Talking directly to hiring managers, create a podcast that hiring managers want to listen to that maybe talks about challenges that people face in recruitment, or actually maybe more so, probably more evergreen or a broader audience is for stuff that's related to, as Rob does around kind of candidates and careers, really kind of having a voice and having an opinion on that. And I think what that also does is it can position you as a thought leader in your own right. And there's no doubt there's huge amounts of traction that you can get by being a host and hosting the conversation and owning the conversation. Absolutely. And then kind of feeding, sponsorship, or as Rob said, kind of tagging your recruitment services on the back of that. But actually, more and more, there is a space in the market for recruiters who lead with clarity around how do we deal with the massive changes that are happening in employment at the moment, the relationship that candidates and people have with their employers, the change in flexibility, in salaries, in career paths, in the future of work, and how that's being affected by AI and technology, there is no shortage of kind of change and topics to share an opinion on and kind of bring into the light. And also the other thing is, I kind of was flippant about my opinions before, but you can put stuff out there as like, this is a view or this is a take. I've got a episode in the pipeline coming up, which is you guys might be familiar with Alex Hormozy, who's written a couple of books and is a huge sort of multi-million dollar investor. And I'm contrasting some work that he did, his last book, kind of the main themes from his last book with Simon Sinek's Start With Why. Both really popular books, both really well known, but actually a real contrast in styles and opinions there. I think there's a lot recruiters can learn from both. So I'm going to be doing something on that, but that's not to say my opinion's right, but it's just presenting that conversation around that these are two different kind of ideas and two different ways of looking at a similar problem. I'm really excited about that. I'll see how that lands. But yeah, thinking about presenting an opinion or presenting some feedback to questions you're receiving, I think there's a huge opportunity for that.
Yeah, perfect. Robert, your hand is up.
Yeah, I just wanted to build on because Hish made a good point of just starting out again, right? I got a horrendous amount of no's, but a no with a podcast guest is not always a no forever. It's just an objection, right? We're in the recruitment game. We deal with objections day in, day out. I actually got Shay Rowbottom, who's a little bit controversial on LinkedIn. Originally, she said no, then eventually I got her hooked and was able to do a webinar. So again, a no may not necessarily be a no straight off the bat, but as your show grows, you get more known. It could be a not now. So never sort of think about, oh, I tried that person, I couldn't get them. Because if you follow up again, you might actually be able to hook them. And I always think now, because more and more podcast invitations are getting flown out there and people are getting invited, it's not necessarily as exciting as it once was. Absolutely is a massive space for podcasting. It's definitely the place to be. Think about what's the value to them, right? WIFM, everyone's favorite radio station. What's in it for me? So if you're reaching out to your target client or a new client, yeah, we want to get you on the show, but you've got to tag on that bit for them at the end, right? To justify their time they're going to give you. So maybe they have a recent book that they've written. Maybe they're going for an award. Maybe they're running an event. Maybe they're doing something that's pioneering within their team that's cutting edge. You need to say, look, through coming on this show, you've researched them. So making them feel really special, that this is the most tailored, crafted, as if you're speccing in your candidate to them. And this is what we're going to do. We're actually going to share your nomination of your award with our 5,000 Twitter followers. We're going to create this blog post for you. We're going to do a special teaser video that drives people to your website. Off the back of that, we'll allow you to embed this into your website as well, so you can get SEO. We'll put a transcript and show notes, so you get that search engine optimization off the back of that as well. And you go to war, right, with the pitch, because this is how we've got people like Carol Baskin from Tiger King. I've got David Jones from Sky Sports. I've had some of the top lawyers, because they get this day in, day out. Like, a good guest is busy, right? A good candidate is busy, and you've got to get their attention. So what's in it for them coming on the show and what they're going to get that they can't get anywhere else or up to a higher standard, that's what's going to get you quality people on your show.
Yeah, absolutely. And touching on your sort of brand in the assets and the interaction that you make, I had a podcast guest on, Rich Evans, and he said he had 2 podcasts before mine and it was an absolute shambles. They sent the information about the podcast 5 minutes literally before it happened. He's like, is this podcast happening or not? They got a couple of questions through, nothing really prepared. Whereas when we do it, we create a really nice, we do pre-interview, we send them a really nicely branded PDF doc with all the questions in it, and just really adds like an air of authority and just capitalizes on the brand and makes you know what you're talking about, really. And people have commented on that as every brought guests on, like, that's a really cool way of doing things. I like that, and it just really adds like an extra edge, and it doesn't really take much work. I think for me, I'm segueing into the prep here as well. So I think if we are going down the guest route, I think it's probably the main one that it really works. I'm going to pose a question over to you, Hishem. What sort of preparation do you do with your guests now?
Yeah, so the process that I always recommend, because again, it's like more FaceTime, is basically I'll do like a 30-minute prep call over video before we do the episodes. I mean, I'm doing mine face-to-face in a studio, so there's quite a lot of investment there. So I really want to try and make sure that we maximize that time, but I'd still do that if it was remote. So the process is I'd have like an initial call with someone, but like, hey, Kieran, like we agreed to like talk about, okay, Kieran's interested in maybe coming on the podcast. We might have an initial conversation about it. I talk about some of the things that Rob has mentioned. You know, why I think it could be worth your time, Kieran, is that this is a digital asset that we can use when we're headhunting for your company. Obviously, we've done a lot of work together this year. So by us doing this interview, I can actually take that to market and have a better way, an individualized way of showcasing, you know, what it might be like to work for your business and the story. And also it should be a great brand building exercise for you guys in terms of all of the people that will be seeing our podcast will be people in, you know, our industry, people that you probably want to be in front of that might be interested in a career at your company. And then Kieran will go, okay, cool, look, I'm definitely open to it. Then I would say, right, first step is we'll book in a 30-minute prep call. In those 30 minutes, I'm really getting to know Kieran. So I want to know, you know, like the career milestones, the important areas that he'd really like to talk about, areas that he's really passionate about, have opinions on. Just make sure that we're on the same page going into the actual recording, so we can then really hopefully get the most out of that. But also it's an opportunity to build rapport. I think great podcast hosts are really good at making people feel comfortable. So if you're good at making people feel comfortable to talk, to open, to share, it's going to be a better experience for the listener. So I think by having that touch point, you can actually get to know people. For me, I'm finding out about people's biggest career milestones, their successes, their challenges. So I do learn quite a lot about these people in a quite deep way before I sit down with them. And then we'll do the actual podcast itself. And then something that I'm toying with, which I think, Hayden, you actually do, which I really like. So I'll do the initial call prep recording. And then I think, Hayden, you mentioned that you then have like a reconnect call after on like how the podcast episode has landed. I think that's quite a smart thing.
One of our clients does it, and then they use it for like business development.
Yeah. So I think that's really smart. So I'll be making sure that I text the guests at the end of the first week of it being released, being like, hey, Darren, like, how did you find this? How's the podcast gone down? What has the feedback been? But that could be another touch point, maybe a 15-minute video call. I'm going to put this in your diary and let's talk about how we feel the podcast went and these things. And then that's just another touch point, which I think are all beneficial when we're thinking about how can we get the most out of doing this podcast, which is forming relationships with great people in our industry. And obviously we want it to generate a business.
Absolutely. Thank you, Hishem. Ben, Robert, anything to add on to preparation or just being a good host in general?
Yeah, I think, you know, the guys have really made the point, and it's absolutely right. But proper preparation really does kind of make all the difference. I think I've copied the same kind of approach that Hishem does with the pre-call and getting to know the client, or the guest, because you are, you know, you're responsible ultimately for creating that environment where they feel confident and open in having that conversation. I've actually had one guest. I have actually had one episode. We did release it, and I encourage you to go and see if you can work out which episode it was. Honestly, I felt like the guest probably wasn't as engaged as they might have been. And that one experience of that was just like, I want to do everything I possibly can to avoid that. A well-engaged guest with good stories, who's really on it. Like I say, the episode we did with Todd Capone, the episode we did with Alex Elliott, both of those where they really were bringing their A game, just took the whole thing through the roof. And it also meant that I felt I was doing so much less work. There are 5 questions that I ask in that prep meeting that might be worth kind of going over. And this is about kind of spelling out, creating a safe zone and kind of spelling out the etiquette for the guest, not so like they know what they shouldn't do, but so they feel safe, so that they know where the kind of the safety rails are a little bit with the conversation. So first thing is I'll ask them, what kind of story did they want to tell? What is the message that they want to share? What would make this kind of episode a real kind of slam dunk for them? What would leave them feeling like they've done like they've created something here that they're really proud about and really happy to share? And then secondly, what topics are kind of off limits, or do they feel less confident in talking about or sharing? So that I'm probably not going to ask them those questions anyway, but by telling me what those questions are, telling me what they don't want to talk about, it gives them the confidence that I'm not going to surprise them mid-interview with something that takes them down an avenue they don't want to go down. There's also a technique that I've taken from Tim Ferriss, which is prefacing questions with something like that. This may lead nowhere. This may take us down a bit of a cul-de-sac, but like, let me ask it, and it'd be good to know your thoughts. And if you don't want to answer it, we can also, if you don't want to answer it, we can cut it from the show. And then the fourth thing is letting people know up front that I'm going to share the episode with them. So ahead of release, so if they want to have a listen to it and ask for it not to be released or ask for anything to be cut back, they can do that. No one ever does that. But as a guest, I can only imagine the level of confidence that it gives them. It's like, oh, bloody hell, if I come off sounding like an idiot today, at least I know that, we can have another go. We can cut that bit out, or if needs be, we can just ditch the episode completely. And then the fifth thing is like making sure that I know exactly what they want the call to action, or if there's anything that they want to sell as part of that journey, making sure that they know that I know what that is, so we can bring that in an effective way, rather than leaving it feeling a little bit, like they're on a sales pitch mission.
Yeah, perfect. Love it. Robert.
Yeah, I'll try not to repeat, obviously, what I absolutely agree with what Ben and Hishem have just said. I just think it's very important. Think about your favorite Netflix series or whatever it is you binge. If that suddenly goes rubbish, you stop watching it. And that's the responsibility of you as a podcast host, to continually make sure that the quality of what you're producing is getting better, or at least maintaining the same, because there's always going to be somebody else starting up. Potentially, we're going to have 7 or 8 new podcasts launching off the back of today. Why the heck should people dedicate their time to listen to your show? I think through that preparation, I think you'll stand a chance of actually separating yourself. For us, the big point comes back to our TOI, the topic of influence. So you'd have to be living under a rock to not understand this year is all about AI. So for us in our industry, just before this recording today, I was doing a podcast episode with a technology lawyer who specializes in robotics and AI, because that is what is hot right now. And it's what people want to know about, how the industry is changing, what that means for careers, what are the relevant hashtags. And we're going to get that content out smartish, because that's where the noise and attention is right now. So again, if there's revolutionary things going on and there's something in your industry, be it construction or something, whatever industry is you recruit, then you want to be getting that content, because that's where the hashtags on social media are. That's where people are having the conversation. That's where you can start hijacking noise, getting attention. And for us, it all links back to that sort of TOI. So when you're thinking about guests, think about, okay, well, what else is going on in the industry? What are some of the things that actually we can really capture attention? I think it's really important to mention that. Little things you can also do, if you can have an assistant or a separate email address, so it looks like it's professional, not just, it's a whole show, it's kind of a whole package that you're selling. We have info@legallyspeakingpodcast.com. It's also a good way to have that, because if the show starts getting big, like Hish, Ben, I get people coming all the time now, hey, can I come on the show? We actually charge up to £2,000 an appearance fee to come on the show, and we have a separate info, because it's not nice you personally having to say, sorry, you can't come on to a prospective client. You just say, look, I'm only involved hosting, this is all handled by our team, you're more than welcome to send inquiries to this and this. Maybe not when you first start, but definitely as you grow, you want to find a way of positioning yourself, not having to have the conversation with basically saying, no, we don't want you on the show. And I found that having a sort of way to deject that as a good strategy. But back to you, Hayden.
Love it. So I'm going to ask 2 more questions, and then we're going to move over to Q&A. I think we've got about 2, 3, 5 minutes. So first, Hishem, for you, one thing I love that you're doing at the moment, and I see that you're really doubling down on it now, is leveraging that podcast into live events. Do you want to give us a little bit of insight on why you made that decision and how well it's working for you, and maybe some lessons that you learned, things that haven't gone so well, whatever you can share about the live events?
It's definitely happened or like organically, I'd say. So did the first one in November 2019, and it went well. It was like a 70-person event. It was a bit of an experiment, really. I thought, people would want to come because a lot of people listen to it, but it's a whole different thing, people paying money and giving you their evening. So I just thought the really cool thing about podcasts I found is, I don't know, I'm assuming all of you listen to your own podcast, but because they are longer form, you do build a real affinity with the people that you listen to. Because you listen to these people a lot. Like if you listen to my podcast every week, that means you might be spending between, an hour to 2 hours with me every month, really. You're learning from the guests, but I'm in your life in some way. So people are really engaged is what I found. So being able to bring people together physically has worked really well. it isn't, if I'm honest, it's just like, for me, the way that I view it, it's just another like brand building exercise, and also a really great way to bring people together. And I think now, in my opinion, people really long for the face-to-face connection, just because of the journey that we've all been on. Like I've really been trying to make effort to try and see all of our customers on our training platform by the end of the year. And every time I walk away from those meetings, I'm like, I'm so fucking glad we've made this trip. Because so many people, you know, it's so easy to just jump on a video call and do that. So I think bringing people physically together as well, is you just build even more credibility with these people, and there's, you know, more of a relationship built. And yeah, like it's been positive. It's been hard, but I would just say it's just another way to bring people together in your industry. I think meetups and networking events, roundtables, like these are all things that a lot of recruiters have done, and they continue to do them because they are effective, they're useful. It gives you another reason to call people, etc., etc. I just think a podcast event, I wouldn't say you have to do it, but is definitely an idea that you could end up doing later on.
Yeah, nice, fantastic, awesome. The last question, I know it's eating into Q&A time, so I apologise, but Robert, I think you've got great experience with landing sponsors and media partner deals, especially with Clio, etc. So could you just give some quick advice on that if you get to that sort of part of your journey?
Yeah, so I've literally just got back from Nashville, where so Clio, they are basically the Nike of the legal world of legal technology. So they were the first legal unicorn business to then go on to become Centaur. They run a huge conference every year, and I got flown out as a media partner to be in Nashville. Huge exposure to top lawyers, everything else that started. How did that all start? Well, first, Hishem's point of consistency. So for us to get a sponsor, we had to be consistently showing up and being seen and visible out there. But the real key piece was actually how I connected my recruiting side of my business with the potential sponsor we wanted. So Clio are trying to target law firms in the UK specifically with their practice management software. It's basically like a CRM in the recruitment world. So they're trying to sell into who I'm recruiting for day in, day out. So I was able to leverage the fact that, you know, I've got a supplier in my industry that wants visibility to my target clients. And by the way, we've got a database of X thousands of people. We've got these relationships, and the partners in these law firms are the owners, decision makers, the equity partners. So I could very straightforwardly say to Clio, look, this is quite a natural synergy. You're trying to plug in your technology into these law firms. We've recruited for these law firms for the last 5-6 years. We have all of these relationships. We could do very simple introductions. And then what we do is we have an arrangement of they'll pay us a baseline fee, a monthly retainer fee, but we also then charge on the front end sales, right? On the back end. So anyone we introduce them to, we get a percentage of anything that converts to a client. So you're suddenly doubling your revenue stream. And then if you can charge for guest appearances, you're tripling your revenue stream. And then if you split your assets out into, well, you can just be the sole sponsor for our video content and for the mid rolls, but you could maybe have sponsors for the other parts of your podcast show. You can suddenly start turning this into a commercial, profitable vehicle, because that was very important to me, because this was never a hobby. Right, I liked it, but I was like, if this is going to do something, it needs to generate me either high quality inbound leads in terms of candidates and clients, but also be its own entity in its own right. So I think it's very important that when you're thinking about sponsors, where there could be an alignment with what you do have to sell and the value of data and the expertise you have and the value you can give it to a sponsor. So I wouldn't, for example, even if they said, maybe it's an extreme example, but if someone said to you, hey, could I give you 20 grand and we're Burger Limited to come and sponsor the League Dispute podcast, it doesn't fit in line with the values. There's not a connection there, and there's no real sort of value back from that. So we were very strategic in terms of who we picked and the journey that they're on, and it's worked out really, really nicely. We had to be consistent, had to keep showing up. We got an email into the inbox saying, hey, we've seen the show, we're quite interested, and then we can connect it all from there. So I think really think about who's penetrating your target clients, and there could be a nice way then to match it together.
Thank
Can
you,
I just
Robert.
add something just quick?
Yes, yeah, Hishem, yeah,
obviously keen to ask questions. I have no idea. It'd be good. Like, I don't know where everyone is on their podcast journey right here currently, but I definitely, when I started my podcast, did not think that I'd be able to like generate revenue from it and think about sponsorships and stuff like that. If I'm assuming all of you in recruitment, I think the number one way that it would impact you, your business, your career, whatever it is, it would be about opportunities and give you more recruitment opportunities. I think, you know, thinking about sponsorship and stuff, I know, Rob, you're on your own journey. with things. And I think you're doing things that I don't even do, like charging people to come on the guests and stuff like that. The number one way I do generate revenue from my podcast in terms of sponsorship, but the number one way it helps my business is leads. Our number one source of leads from growing recruitment companies that are interested in potentially investing in their team development is the podcast. So I think that's how it should impact. I've envisioned it impacting your businesses would be leads, opening up doors and giving you opportunities to do recruitment with hopefully great people in your industry. That's how I'd envision it rather than sponsorships, but I don't know. You might disagree with that.
I mean, majority of a few of our clients that we do podcasts with attribute 50% of all new business inquiries down to podcasts now. So it's actually pretty crazy.
That's how it would impact you. Sponsorships, I'd say, is a nice end up to get.
Yeah, I think it's an important point because I also wouldn't have a sponsor that is a law firm because I'd be alienated to my audience, right? So we had a lot of small firms because if I've got a recruitment company on the back end, it wouldn't make sense. So I wouldn't necessarily have one of your best clients come and sponsor your show because that, again, is probably a big conflict of interest. So yeah, it's a good point.
Right, Q&A. I'm conscious we've got 5 minutes left, but yeah, anyone got any questions that I'd like to ask any of us four? No?
Let's go as granular as possible as well.
A quick question.
As granular as possible. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got a quick question if that's right. So just in terms of the structure, so working with Hayden at the moment, we've just done a couple of podcasts. We're just trying to get like the tone right. So I think ours is a little bit more on the educational side. So the first one was really, really structured and laid out, which was very helpful in just keeping the continuity with it. So having, keeping the structure there. So it wasn't just a pointless chit chat. The second one was the other end of the spectrum. So it was more of a chit chat. Managed to get some good insights from it, but we re-recorded it actually, and it turned into basically like an interview. So it was just too formal. So it's quite hard trying to get that balance sometime. Ultimately, from our side, we're trying to get the assets from this as well, so we can rehash the content and create, other snippets and slides and clips that we can push out to get more from it. But just in terms of the tonality, I guess from like an engagement perspective, how do you guys go about that? Because if you approach people and say, it's fairly informal, it's a chit chat, it can be quite difficult to get the content, like the length of it right and the structure of it right. So do you guys have a bit of a guide on sort of how informal versus formal these should be?
And what just quickly, sorry, Ben, if you don't, just so we get all the context, what industry do you do? What
we do?
Give us a bit more context.
We're working in partnership with a training consultancy, so it's aimed specifically at leaders. So ours is all around leadership and training.
Right. Okay. Yeah. Nice. In FMCG.
In FMCG, exactly.
All right. Okay. Cool. Sorry, go on, Ben. Yeah, I just thought that context would be helpful.
Yeah, no, definitely. No, appreciate it. So look, my initial thought on that in terms of tonality is that I'm really clear what the purpose of the podcast is. And that's another thing that I share in those preparatory meetings, which is like, I want the people to come on. I want my guests on the show because I think they're interesting. But I think most of the people that I gravitate towards and the conversation I have with them is, look, I want to showcase you and the best of your stories and experiences. But the thing that my audience want to take away is tactical advice. What can they do? What can they implement? So the questions, we're going to talk about your experiences, but we're also always going to come back to, every theme is going to come back to, what are the tactical what are the takeaways? What are the things that you would share with, people listening to this about what they can do differently? And I'll also, with that, create some kind of more technical or case study type questions to get their take on it.
But you'd share those before, right? So you'd share the topics that you're talking about so they can prepare, right?
Exactly. Okay. Usually like 3 to 4 topics rather than a specific list of the 15 questions or however many questions we get through, but just enough so they know where we're going, what the direction of travel is, without feeling like there's any surprises coming down the track.
I know we're tough on time, so speakers, if you need to drop out at like 1 o'clock,
I'm all right.
Feel free.
So Rob, just quickly, so how many episodes have you done?
We've done 2. So we've
all right, cool.
Yeah.
So hopefully this comes across the right way. But firstly, I don't think you've put enough out there to determine if it's right or not. Like the fact that you've recorded something, you've decided that you might not be proud of it or happy with it, but I think the best way to really understand, is this the way that people actually find helpful, is actually putting stuff out there and then sharing it with people and getting feedback would be the first thing, is what I'd say. Just because I think that would be more helpful, because although obviously you're creating it and you'd benefit from this, ultimately you're not the target audience. The leaders in FMCG are. So that would be the first thing that I'd be very conscious of, just, just being too of a perfectionist with it. And like these early episodes, part of it is experimenting, let's be honest, and you'll figure that out. As long as you're upfront and honest with people, people are going to know it's your third episode. You're not going to be perfect from the very beginning. I think the structure, I would like, if it's leadership in FMCG, I think, you know, what for me would be like a no-brainer is surely people in those seats, it would be interesting to understand how they got there. You know, what they would do differently that maybe help them get into leadership more quickly. What are some of the surprises that come up with being in that seat in FMCG? What are some of the challenges they face, like leadership approach, etc.? So I'd like to think that it would just be, I don't see why it wouldn't be just conversational about how they got to where they got to, what they do differently, a bit like what I do. And then I really agree with Ben. The biggest thing that I've learned this year, which has really shown in the amount of people that listen to my podcast this year, is I think because there are a lot more podcasts, people are a lot more protective of their time, I would actually say. And there's a lot more different things to listen to. So when we've had real big spikes and I've listened to them back, the main reason why I found is because they are a lot more tangible with what Ben was saying. So I think what's going to make more people listen to it, Rob, is if I listen to your episode, is there going to be actual things that I can walk away with that I can take into my leadership role? Whether that be how to better execute a one-on-one, whether that be how to better ask people things rather than tell people things, whatever it may be. So the better that you can get at getting the granular takeaways, the more people are going to share it. Because a leader, if it's something that I get valuable from, I might know another leader go, hey, Rob, we need to listen to this. There's some really good insights here from another leader in FMCG. So I don't see why interview conversational style on their career wouldn't work.
Yeah, I think just in terms of the two ends of the spectrum, the first was a bit, we just didn't prepare properly. The second was so well prepared that the answers were
a bit too,
it felt like it was read out basically. So we actually reverted back to the first one because it's more conversational.
Yeah, nice.
Yeah, but so you're saying you just kind of basically just put stuff out there and get to play around with it.
Well, I'm just saying, like, just don't be too protective of it being perfect in this. Like, you're just better off putting stuff out there. That's a big part of marketing at the end of the day. You have to like put stuff out there to learn. But yeah, and I think as you'll do more of these, Rob, what you have to get better at is, okay, if someone asks a question, if there's someone answers a question, you have to peel back the onion on it. That's what good podcast hosts do. Like if you say, yeah, I approach leadership like this, and it's a bit high level, it's like, tell me a bit more about how you do that exactly.
Yeah, I have listened to a few of your, admittedly not a lot, but a few of your podcasts in the past, and I always hear you ask that.
So like as well, you just get better at that as well.
Yeah. You go off the script a little bit. So you'll have a format, you have your pre-call, but then always try and think about maybe what they might answer, and then I always try and think about what would be a follow-up question on that. So just keep digging deeper, because they'll prepare for some of this stuff already, and then you throw them a little bit of a left field question, and you'll get a more candid sort of real answer as well.
Yeah, it's just sometimes you look at the clock and it's like you think you're like a quarter of the way through what you thought you're going to be, and you've been like
it's hard
chatting.
Yeah, again, that's a skill, mate. Again, that is literally a skill. Trust me, I've been there. It's like, oh fuck, we've done 20 minutes and we're still talking about this. Again, you've got to pull people back. You've got to be like, sorry, like let's go into this. It's just part of the doing the reps, which you'll get.
Yeah. Cool.
Darren, did you have a question?
Oh, I can't hear you.
Can't hear you, bud. No, he was unmuted. Oh no.
Yeah, okay.
There we go. Yeah, we got you.
So the question's about editing, and maybe again give some context. So we've started, my colleague and I started a podcast for RecTech, basically for bringing in RecTech suppliers in. So there's actually a demo as well at the end. So that's the sort of the change. So it's a video. So we've done about 10 episodes so far, and we've got about probably ahead of ourselves. And then we're now starting editing. I've been editing for the last probably 3 or 4 weeks, and my God, struggling a little bit, the different solutions. I feel like I'm going to start again and redo the editing. If you're doing it again, starting from scratch, what's any suggestion you have? We use Riverside to record. At the moment, we've gone with Capwing to do the editing, because they talk about obviously their fancy AI tools, which I'm still not able to leverage. But yeah, just interested to hear your thoughts on the editing piece.
Edit the actual audio or like the clips and stuff?
Audio, yeah, the whole like all of the whole we've got about an hour of episode, and the actual because you do video as well now, so I know it's obviously well. So yeah,
but you wouldn't have to start with that necessarily.
It's true. Yeah, but I mean, yeah, we still have the video at the end with the demo. I need that to go onto YouTube.
Well, so just quickly, what's it like? obviously I'm assuming this is just part of like your business. It's not like
It's funny. I work in talent acquisition, and it's around sort of work for Ericsson, and I as part of my role I was a TA tech SME, so I looked at a technology stack, and it's about speaking to other people, sort of TA tech and enablers, say what's out there, what different products are there, and it's trying to understand that, are they fixing the problems in the market.
Yeah, so for my stance on this is like, personally, I'll just outsource it. Personally, you can literally get someone on Upwork for like £50 an episode, but maybe even less. Like, I just don't think on the audio side, honestly, mate, I would just fucking outsource it. What I didn't edit any of, being honest with you, I didn't edit any of mine at the beginning. So I said to people, like, when I hit record and then I hit stop record, that was the episode. Like that's how I started, just to make my life easier, because I was in recruitment. I didn't know how to fucking edit like audio and stuff like that. And like, you just end up in a rabbit hole with it, and it's hard. So I don't think it's time well spent. Personally. And then the video, that is different. That requires more resources. It does. It costs more money. It's different skill set entirely. So I don't know. Maybe I consider just outsourcing it.
Yeah, I can
I would
imagine
just +1 that outsourcing.
Yeah,
sorry,
like,
and it's probably what you want to hear right now, Hayden. But it is because I can earn a lot more per hour, or with the value of my time, rather than trying to do so. So I think it's not a bad investment. Bear in mind also that content is then there. So you're going to be able to repurpose it time and time again. So you'll be able to squeeze out, even if it's 50 quid it's costing for the hour, if it comes out as a good quality finish and you outsource it, you're going to be able to reuse it time and time again. It's just no point getting frustrated. Originally, I was just starting to look at things and merging tracks and this, that, and the other. And if you do a combination of in-person and video, which we do, you just don't want that headache personally. And you can get some really cost-effective options now as well.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I can give you the technical thing of it, but there is it's a skill set of editing the footage in programs like Adobe or Premiere Pro. We've got a copywriter that will go through every single episode and upload it to AI and go through and find all the topic things, and there is a whole process behind it, and that's not the best use of your time, because if you'd have just outsourced it, like, as soon as you started recording, you'd have those 10 episodes out already. You'd have all the assets out, going out on social media, and you'd be recording loads more, and you'd be so much further down in your journey than you are now, where you're now considering, have I spent too much time? You have a sunk cost fallacy with it all now. So I would definitely, if you go for Fiverr, someone like us or anyone really, I would say definitely +4 on outsourcing. Yeah, thanks.
That was actually going to be my question as well. Was and just for context, we haven't actually started yet. We've still been in the thinking about it phase for months. But just thinking about actually launching it, thinking about like getting the guests on, and probably the content is less daunting than, hang on, are we recording this on Zoom, and then what are we doing with it when we've actually recorded it? So my question was going to be similar, like any recommendations, and my thought was absolutely not to try and do it internally. Was like, who the hell can we get this out to that can just do it for us, like from day one? But even, I guess my first question is, recommendations in terms of like how to record it. Is Zoom a good platform, or are there better options for that? And if we're looking at a remote kind of face-to-face type interview setup.
So I use Riverside for all of my interviews, and it's a great piece of kit, because what it does is it records locally and then uploads the file to the internet afterwards. So basically, you're getting like local recorded quality, which means that even if you've got a slightly patchy internet signal, or something happens to the signal during the show, it doesn't drop out at all. It just records it onto their computer and then uploads, which actually has saved a couple of episodes for me, because there were a couple where, whatever reason, the person I was talking to, their internet signal dropped out, but the episode was saved.
Yeah, I would definitely recommend remote recording Riverside down for sure. I use that as well. I think the number one milestone you want to get to is, you don't want to publish any episode until you've at least recorded 5, because there's nothing more worse than recording an episode, releasing it, and I'm like, fuck, now we need to get another recording and release it. You know what I mean? So you always want to give yourself breathing space. So right now, I've got podcast episodes ready to be released until like end of like November. So I always try and be like 4 to 5 weeks ahead, because as well, you've got a business to run. So you're busy. So I think the number one milestone you want to get to is getting recording 3 to 5 episodes, and then that's gonna encourage you even more to get these edited, because you would have done the legwork of getting them recorded. You know what I mean? And then you can figure that all out. But Riverside for sure is great recommendation.
It's awesome. Super honest with yourself. Literally sit down and think, how consistent can I be with this? Because it's easy to just go, oh yeah, I'm going to smash out 1 per week. But then if you especially go in your guest format, it's gonna get super stressful. I made the same mistake, and I ended up pushing it to 1 per fortnight to start off with. So yeah, just think about that. Get a bank in, like Hishem said, but also be really honest with yourself and like how many you could actually find guests for. Because if people start to say no to start off with, you might run out of guests, and yeah, you're stuck really, and you've sort of promised the consistency.
What I would just quickly add is I'm also Riverside, so 3 of us definitely use Riverside. Is best bits. So if you are struggling and you've got content, we did our sort of season 1 best bits, season 2 best bits, like clips. So you can create an episode from your best parts or key moments. That's another way to kind of put in filler content. But I'm a big advocate, like Hish. I think we've even got content recorded almost to the end of the year, because we're a weekly show, and it's amazing how those weeks do come around. What I would also say with podcasts, Hayden mentioned we're into season 7. It's a great way to test, right? So if you do seasons, it's the easiest way to rebrand. I mean, this branding has only been on our last 2 seasons. But if it doesn't go as you planned, it's the easiest thing to repackage or relaunch a podcast as the new season. So even if you go down there, and the other thing I was going to say to you, Rob, to your question is, ask your community for feedback. If you like the show, we'd love to hear from you. Anything you'd like to see improved, anything you'd like to see more of, keep them engaged, and then it creates the community aspect. And then you might get some, what are the questions we're not asking the guests that you want to know? That will help in the direction of travel you want to take your show. But yeah, there's just some extra thoughts we mentioned.
A +1 for that particular point from you there, Robert. As I say, my show is comparatively small, but pretty much every day, certainly several times a week, people will talk to me about the show and come to me and say, and again, actually, Hayden mentioned the point earlier about direct revenue from it. I think I probably have 1 or 2 clients, maybe a handful of clients who have come directly from the podcast, but it helps in that ecosystem of marketing messaging. And it gives you, particularly for someone like me who, I've got my outbound strategies, I've got LinkedIn, but actually having that third kind of, that third point of contact kind of creates a bit of a content web for people to land in. They'll look at the LinkedIn, where else can I go to find out more about Ben, what Ben's about? Podcast, YouTube. It just creates an ecosystem that I'm sure I'm generating a lot more revenue from than I would without it.